Ever notice how some narcissists seem intimidated by you while others treat you as easy prey? There is a deep psychological explanation for this one that Carl Jung recorded in private notes, but rarely addressed publicly. In Jung's confidential framework, empaths fall into 5 distinct categories, each with a particular psychological structure that neutralizes certain narcissistic strategies. Most people miss that you're not merely an empath. You embody a specific empath archetype with built-in defenses that, once activated, make you effectively impervious to some manipulators. I've spent years examining these hidden groupings and found that many empaths never access their full capacity because they don't recognize their exact type. Today, I'll outline Jung's complete empath taxonomy and the precise psychological triggers that awaken each type's strongest protections. If you've ever felt helpless in the face of manipulation or puzzled by your heightened perceptions, what follows may reshape how you understand yourself and manage your relationships. Comment 1. If you've noticed some manipulators react strongly to your presence. Comment 2. If you're still unsure which empath archetype you might be, or how it protects you. If you feel these psychology sharings are helpful and relatable, you're welcome to become a channel member and stay with us on a deeper journey. As a member, you'll get early and extended access to more in-depth practical content that you can apply in everyday life. This is not abstract theory. It is practical psychological insight making a tangible difference. Before we examine the 5 deadly empath types, consider subscribing. Our community is expanding daily with people awakening to their psychological potential. These insights are enabling thousands to reclaim a sense of agency they once thought unreachable. With that, let's explore Jung's confidential classification together. Jung's clinical observations suggest empathy is not a single uniform capacity. Rather, it manifests through 5 separate psychological structures, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Identifying your precise empath type matters because each one needs a tailored activation route to unlock its full protective functions. Many empaths falter by following generic guidance that doesn't fit their particular design, like attempting to open a high-end security system with the wrong code. No matter how carefully you try, it won't engage. The first deadly type Jung identified is the reflective empath. This profile exhibits exceptional psychological mirroring, which, when activated, becomes, using Jung's phrasing, near-perfect kryptonite for narcissism. Prior to activation, reflective empaths unconsciously take in and echo the shadow elements narcissists strive to conceal from themselves. This same trait initially leaves reflective empaths susceptible to gaslighting and reality distortion, since they tend to doubt their own perceptions when these clash with others' stated accounts. Here is why this type becomes so formidable after activation. Once reflective empaths recognize and own their mirroring ability, they can return a narcissist's disowned material with such accuracy that it initiates a narcissistic injury cascade, a process in which the fabricated self begins to unravel upon exposure. The reflective empath is not seeking to harm. This effect emerges organically when their innate function operates free from people-pleasing impulses or self-questioning. Does this resonate? Do you notice that straightforwardly sharing your perceptions can provoke outsized emotional responses in some individuals? Do you absorb others' feelings and then see them grow defensive as though you've glimpsed what they would rather conceal? These patterns suggest you may be a reflective empath who has not yet fully activated this capacity. After activation, manipulators will struggle to keep their facades intact around you, not because you confront them, but because your mere presence makes the false self untenable. The second deadly type in Jung's framework is the intuitive empath. This profile has a remarkable, largely preconscious pattern detection ability. Prior to activation, intuitive empaths register their talent as sudden hunches, visceral impressions, or immediate knowings about people and situation, signals they often downplay or rationalize away. Discounting these cues leaves them exposed to manipulators who use plausible-sounding logic to drown out a target's instinctive alarms. Once activated, intuitive empaths develop psychological X-ray vision, perceiving manipulative patterns immediately, often before those tactics are fully launched. This ability functions not through deliberate analysis, but through refined pattern recognition that surfaces somatically prior to conscious awareness. At full capacity, they detect discrepancies between language and intent so precisely that manipulative strategies effectively fail on contact. Do you get powerful gut impressions about others that you later override, only to find your first read was accurate? Do you detect subtexts or covert motives yet set them aside as uncharitable? Such patterns indicate an intuitive empath who has not fully learned to trust and integrate this function. With integration, you'll navigate complex dynamics with striking accuracy, discerning the reality of people and situations without seeking outside confirmation. The third type Jung described is the boundary empath. This uncommon profile has a powerful capacity for energetic differentiation, which once activated yields impenetrable psychological sovereignty. Before activation, boundary empaths experience heightened sensitivity to others' emotions, resulting in persistent emotional contagion and trouble separating their own feelings from those they absorb. Consequently, they are especially susceptible to emotional manipulation and energy vampirism. After activation, boundary empaths sustain full energetic integrity amid highly charged settings, whereas other empaths may need to exit overwhelming contexts. Activated boundary empaths can stay engaged while retaining exact awareness of self-other boundaries. This confers a natural resistance to tactics that depend on boundary erosion, guilt induction, emotional flooding, and shifting responsibility. Does this describe your experience? In intense settings, do you take on others' emotions until your own become indistinct? Do forceful personalities make it hard to hold your center? These signs point to a boundary empath whose differentiation has not yet been activated. With activation, you'll notice a decisive change, sustained clarity, and fidelity to your own truth, no matter the surrounding emotional climate. The fourth deadly category, termed the transmutative empath, is exceptionally rare. Its defining strength is psychological alchemy, the capacity to take in negative emotional energy and transform it into something qualitatively different. Prior to activation, transmutative empaths often function as emotional processing hubs for those around them, internalizing others' psychological toxins and, in turn, becoming drained or unwell. This profile draws narcissists who often unconsciously look for containers for their disowned affect. With activation, transmutative empaths cultivate alchemical immunity, the capacity to metabolize others' projections without taking on their harmful residue. They cease to be passive containers and instead operate as active transformers, able to receive, convert, and return the energy in changed form. Consequently, projection-driven manipulation ceases to work. The material neither adheres nor injures, but is altered in the transmutative field. Do you regularly become the repository for others' distress, taking in their negativity and feeling it somatically? Do those around you leave lighter while you shoulder the weight. These indicators point to a transmutative empath whose alchemical capacity has not yet been activated. Once activated, you can stay in intense emotional settings without internalizing their toxicity, converting the surrounding energies instead of absorbing them. The fifth and most formidable type in Jung's schema is the sovereign empath. This very rare profile embodies what Jung termed complete psychological autonomy, a condition in which external approval or validation does not affect one's identity or grasp of reality. Prior to activation, sovereign empaths may seem prone to approval-seeking and people-pleasing, which makes them look like easy marks for manipulators who exploit those needs for control. Yet this seeming weakness is misleading. When fully activated sovereign empaths experience what Jung called the ultimate psychological liberation, a full uncoupling of self-concept from external validation. The result is the strongest possible immunity to narcissistic manipulation, since most tactics depend on exploiting a target's craving for approval, validation, or acceptance. When that craving is absent, manipulators lose all leverage. Does this sound familiar? Do you repeatedly chase approval and validation, despite an inner sense that you do not need such confirmations? Do you alter yourself across social settings and feel oddly inauthentic? These patterns suggest a sovereign empath whose autonomy has not yet been activated. After activation, you'll feel a deep freedom, the capacity to stay entirely true to yourself, irrespective of others' views or responses. A notable feature of Jung's system is his view that most empaths are not a single pure type, but a blend of two and sometimes three, with one functioning as dominant. Comment 1 if you're convinced you're a blend of types. Comment 2 if you feel you're a single pure type or aren't sure yet. This blending produces individualized profiles with distinct activation needs and protective strengths. Knowing your primary and secondary types is essential to unlocking your full empathic capacity. Now we'll examine the precise triggers that activate each type's protective functions. For reflective empaths, activation comes through conscious mirroring, intentionally recognizing the emotions and projections taken in from others and reflecting them back exactly without editing or interpretation. This is not an act of manipulation or aggression. It is a practice of psychological integrity, reflecting what is, rather than absorbing or processing it on others' behalf. The practice produces a rapid change in functioning, instead of being an unconscious mirror that internalizes others' projections. The reflective empath becomes a conscious mirror that returns them with clarity. This shift is frequently paired with an unusual effect. Manipulators grow uneasy around the reflective empath, reporting a sense of exposure or being seen through without knowing precisely why. For intuitive empaths, activation is tied to body-centered perception, noticing and trusting the bodily sensations that accompany intuitive hits, instead of demanding mental verification first. Practically, this involves attending to how intuition shows up somatically, perhaps chest tightness, a stomach drop, or a surge of energy, and treating these signals as valid data rather than irrational reactions. The practice circumvents the conscious mind's habit of overruling intuition with logic, allowing direct access to the intuitive empath's pattern recognition system. Once access is established, intuitive signals grow clearer and more dependable, often carrying a recognizable bodily signature. The empath learns to identify and trust. This confers rapid resistance to gaslighting and reality-warping tactics, because the empath's confidence in perception no longer hinges on external validation or rational justification. For boundary empaths, Activation requires energetic differentiation, intentionally discerning the subtle, qualitative differences between self-generated feelings and those absorbed from others. The distinction can be very fine and demands careful attention, yet Jung noted there is always a perceptible bodily difference between these two emotional categories. Self-originating emotions feel integrated, whereas absorbed emotions register as slightly foreign or incongruent with the boundary empath's general affect. This work establishes an energetic immune system, an automatic filter that processes emotional input before it is taken in. Instead of shutting out emotional data, which would dull sensitivity, the system labels input by source, averting the boundary confusion that enables manipulation. With full activation, boundary empaths stay receptive to emotional cues while preserving precise clarity about their origin and character. For transmutative empaths, activation hinges on conscious metabolization, deliberately engaging with absorbed negative energy instead of avoiding or purging it. The process entails acknowledging the absorbed energy, permitting it to be fully present without resistance, and then intentionally altering its quality through sustained attention. This is not a matter of replacing negative thoughts with positive affirmations. It is direct work with the energetic texture of what has been absorbed. The practice awakens the transmutative empath's inherent alchemy, shifting it from an unconscious draining process to a conscious one that can generate vitality. Jung noted that fully activated transmutative empaths frequently feel invigorated rather than drained after interactions that once exhausted them, not due to blocking input, but through active participation in transformation. For sovereign empaths, activation is driven by self-referencing, intentionally measuring every perception choice and value against an internal standard rather than an external benchmark. This means cultivating the habit of asking, "Is this true for me?" rather than considering whether a choice will be acceptable to others for decisions large and small. It demands a basic shift from pursuing external validation to cultivating internal validation through steady self-trust and self-respect. This practice switches on the sovereign empath's innate autonomy, reorienting them from external reference points to internal ones. Jung observed that the change typically builds gradually, then crosses a tipping point, where the need for external validation drops away, revealing an underlying psychological sovereignty long obscured by conditioned approval seeking. Once activation is complete, tactics that depend on approval seeking lose all effectiveness. What follows when an empath fully activates their type-specific protections? Jung noted an intriguing effect. Narcissists and other manipulators appear to sense the activation unconsciously and start avoiding the activated empath altogether. It is as though they intuit that their standard tactics will fail or even backfire against this person. The avoidance is not deliberate strategy, but an instinctive reaction to the disappearance of familiar vulnerabilities. This produces a paradox. An empath who no longer requires protection effectively receives it anyway through manipulators' unconscious withdrawal. Identification or active defense becomes unnecessary. Their psychological presence itself deters manipulation. Jung referred to this as effortless boundary maintenance, boundaries embedded in one's way of being, rather than asserted or policed. Comment 1. If you've ever felt people back off once you stood firmly in your truth. Comment 2. If you still see manipulators escalate when you hold a boundary. For empaths tied to unavoidable relationships with narcissistic individuals, family co-parents, colleagues, Jung found that activation yields not only protection, but a deep alteration of the relational dynamic. The narcissist's standard tactics not only fail, but frequently rebound, producing consequences for the manipulator instead of the target. This is not retaliation or counter-manipulation by the empath. Rather, the interaction's natural laws operate without distortion once the empath stops unconsciously colluding. The change can be difficult for both sides, as it restructures long-standing relationships, sometimes years or decades in the making. Typically, the narcissist escalates manipulation attempts before realizing the former pattern is no longer available. At that juncture, two common outcomes appear. The narcissist withdraws to find easier targets, or the relationship shifts toward greater authenticity as they are compelled to relate without their habitual manipulations. What stands out most about Jung's empath taxonomy is that it reframes empathic sensitivity from a liability to control into an advanced psychological capacity to awaken. Each of the 5 types is not a burden, but a distinct form of psychological intelligence, which, when fully expressed, generates natural resistance to manipulation while sharpening an empath's precision and clarity in complex interactions. This reframing frees empaths who have heard that sensitivity makes them easy prey, or that they must toughen up to avoid exploitation. Jung's findings point the other way. Empowerment comes not from dulling sensitivity, but from conscious engagement with your particular form of sensitivity activation instead of armor expression, rather than mere protection. I've seen this shift in thousands who use Jung's framework to identify and activate their type. A reflective empath captured it well. "It's like I spent years trying to dim my mirror because I thought the problem was that I reflected too much. Now I understand that the solution was to make my reflection more conscious and precise, not less powerful. When I stopped absorbing reflections and started simply reflecting them accurately, everything changed." Danish and intuitive empath reported a parallel realization. "I used to think my intuitive hits were just anxiety or overthinking. So I was constantly talking myself out of what I knew to be true. Learning to locate these hits in my body, rather than trying to validate them with my mind, was revolutionary. Now I can distinguish between actual anxiety and intuitive information, and my hit rate for accurate perceptions is nearly perfect." A boundary empath explained activation like this: "The game changer was realizing that I didn't need to block emotions to maintain boundaries. I just needed to correctly identify where they were coming from. Once I could feel the difference between my emotions and absorbed ones, maintaining boundaries became effortless rather than exhausting. I can be fully present with someone in emotional pain without taking on their pain as my own." Pornam, a transmutative empath, offered this reflection. "I spent years trying to protect myself from absorbing negative energy, not realizing that absorption and transformation was actually my gift. When I stopped resisting the absorption and started consciously participating in the transformation process, everything shifted. Now I can sit with the most toxic emotional states and watch them transform without depleting me." A sovereign empath summarized the shift succinctly. "I realized one day that I was still making decisions based on what would please others, despite all my talk about boundaries and self-care, when I started genuinely checking each choice against my internal compass, rather than anticipated external reactions. I felt this incredible liberation. It wasn't about becoming selfish. It was about becoming authentic. And strangely, my relationships improved rather than suffered." These accounts mirror the pattern Jung observed. When empaths activate by type, they gain not only protection from manipulation, but a significant amplification of their native capacities. Sensitivity, that once seemed like a weakness, becomes a central strength, enabling striking precision and effectiveness in human dynamics. This raises a key question. What if you don't fit neatly into one type? Jung's work indicates most empaths combine two, sometimes three types, with one dominant. This produces distinctive activation needs and protections that defy one-size-fits-all advice. Clarifying your specific mix is essential to fully activating your empathic potential. For instance, a mainly reflective empath with an intuitive secondary should prioritize conscious mirroring while cultivating body-centered perception as support. A primarily intuitive empath with boundary as secondary should first strengthen trust in intuitive hits, alongside building clear energetic differentiation to sustain the process. Jung noted some pairings become especially potent. Reflective sovereign yields the ultimate narcissistic deterrent, an empath who mirrors disowned material with precision while staying wholly unmoved by the reaction. Intuitive transmutative produces preemptive alchemical protection, sensing and transforming negative energy before it is fully launched. Knowing your exact combination lets you design a targeted activation plan instead of using generic guidance that may impede your type. This tailored approach speeds activation and offers more complete protection than broad practices. As we conclude, a common worry deserves attention. Does activation make you cold or detached? Jung's findings indicate the opposite. Type-aligned activation tends to enhance, not diminish empathic gifts. Empaths connect more genuinely, read more precisely, and provide authentic support without draining themselves. The reason is that activation clears distortions caused by unconscious absorption. Rather than taking in emotions indiscriminately, activated empaths register them with clear awareness of nature and origin. They respond from centered awareness instead of triggered states and engage from psychological clarity rather than boundary confusion. The outcome is not reduced empathy, but empathy that is more precise, effective, and sustainable. The shift from draining empathy to energizing empathic intelligence, from unconscious contagion to conscious engagement, from vulnerability to power. Consider which of Jung's 5 types best fits your experience, which triggers align with your current process, and which protections would most change difficult relationships. This very reflection initiates activation by bringing into awareness empathic functions that may have run largely outside consciousness. Recall that activation does not mean becoming someone else. It means becoming more fully yourself. It's not about muting sensitivity, but directing it with precision and effectiveness, not armoring against connection, but engaging from clarity and choice. That, in essence, is individuation in Jung's sense, not climbing to some summit to discover a new ego, but returning to the center where the self already abides, quiet, inclusive, inherently ordered. As the self comes into focus, each psychological function reclaims its rightful role. The persona stops masquerading as your identity and resumes its proper task of social mediation. The shadow no longer sabotages from backstage because it has a seat at the table. Anima, animus cease their standoffs and begin to harmonize intuition with intellect. In this state, protection isn't a defensive tactic. It's the inevitable byproduct of inner order, the very dynamic you called effortless boundary maintenance. What does practice look like? Not more hacks, but the discipline of noticing. For reflective empaths, every conversation becomes a ritual of honesty mirror. What is precisely, neither sharpening it to punish, nor softening it to please. Intuitive empaths treat the body as a radar array. Cultivate methodical trust in the somatic signature of intuitive hits. Keep micrologs, context, sensation, outcome, until accuracy speaks for itself. Boundary empaths build a subtle habit label emotional origin in real-time me. Not me staying soft, yet unmistakably clear. Transmutative empaths work like alchemists, allow incoming affect to remain long enough to transform, rather than ejecting it or carrying it on your back. And sovereign empaths practice self-referencing in the smallest choices. Each honest yes-no is a micro-adjustment that strengthens your central axis. You'll also notice an emerging ethic of presence, not morality imposed from outside, but an interior precision that renders manipulation ineffective, because it finds no surface to grip. This is why compulsory relationships, family co-parents, colleagues, begin to reorganize themselves. The old pattern either collapses or is forced into greater sincerity. The initial discomfort is merely the creak of obsolete structures falling away. Finally, do not mistake this new strength for coldness. Jung is clear. The more whole you become, the more warm and lucid you are. Your empathy does not diminish, it becomes focused, durable, and effective. Activation in the deep sense does not turn you into a fortress. It turns you into an ecosystem, receiving, classifying, transmuting, and responding by the natural rhythm of the self. And that very rhythm is the shield you no longer need to raise. Jung's 5 deadly empath types are distinct expressions of a core human capacity for deep connection and perception. By understanding and activating your type, you convert what once seemed a weakness into a primary strength, supporting not only protection, but the full expression of your unique empathic nature. In closing, your empathic nature is not a burden, but a specific psychological intelligence awaiting activation. Once activated, you become effectively untouchable to those who would exploit your gifts. Comment 1 if you're ready to start a concrete activation practice this week. Comment 2 if you want guidance to identify your exact type before you begin. If you'd love to keep receiving more meaningful videos about psychology, healing, and understanding yourself better, consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. Your registration not only unlocks more valuable content for you, but also gives me the motivation to keep creating and sharing regularly.